Chang in San Francisco, and this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up in the next hour, it is the biggest tech startup IPO since Snap went public 2 years ago, and the largest IPO in the U.S. so far this year. We'll talk about Lyft's prospects as the roadshow gets set to kick off. Plus, Apple's surprise announcement. The company unexpectedly reveals a new iPad and iPad mini. How does this fit into the overall device strategy? And U.S. state officials are in the early stages of a probe into Google focused on antitrust and privacy concerns in the largest coordinated effort to take on big tech since the 1990s. We will hear from the Attorney General of Texas, Ken Paxton. But first, to our top story. In the first big tech IPO of the year, Lyft is hoping to raise more than $2 billion. That would value the ride-hailer at almost $20 billion. Lyft plans to sell almost 31 million shares at $62 to $68 apiece. This after the company reported it lost $991 million in 2018 on just over $2 billion in revenue. The shares are set to price on March 28th and start trading on the NASDAQ the following day. Joining us to discuss, we've got Bloomberg Tech's Eric Newcomer, who has been charting this from the very beginning. Eric, what new information do we have now that we know the pricing strategy?
You know, it's about what we'd been talking about. I mean, for a while, the range was 18 to 30, then it narrowed into 20 to 25 billion valuation. Now, it seems like the market cap could be just under 20 billion. And then there are a lot of RSUs, these stock grants that go to employees. That puts us somewhere 20 to 23. So depending how you slice it, it looks like, we're looking at a Lyft valuation between 20 and 25 billion, like we've been talking about. So really, to me, it's still wait and see. The excitement is seeing sort of how retail investors and just in the public markets value a company that on the one hand has been able to sell revenue and on the other hand continues to lose hundreds of millions of dollars a year.
Well, what have investors been saying since they saw the S1 prospectus and learned that Lyft is losing half as much money as it makes?
Yeah, I mean, to some degree, it feels like for now we're sort of numb to losses. I think there's so much excitement around this industry that it hasn't been a huge focus. I think Lyft and Uber have been able to talk about sort of contribution margins and sort of how they're going to continue to improve the margins over time. I looked at a video that Lyft put together, and they really talk about how they're making more for individual riders. The ratio between revenue and losses is improving. If you look at sales and marketing as a percentage of revenue, it's going down. So I think there are ways that they're slicing it to make it more palatable. But, in their risk factors, they have the classic, we could never turn a profit. And I think with the case of Lyft, it remains sort of a big question mark.
And it looks like Lyft is certainly going to beat Uber to the public markets by at least several weeks. What does that mean?
Yeah, I think the race has been over for some time. Lyft has a much bigger incentive to move first so that we're having this conversation now. It's sort of the center of anyone interested in ride-hailing's attention. That's good for Lyft. Might not have happened if it was after Uber. Uber, on the other hand, is a much bigger company. There are way more pieces to put together, needs to explain sort of ownership stakes. There's been talks about an autonomous sort of investment from SoftBank. So there's just a lot for Uber to do. So Lyft is going to get out first.
All right. Bloomberg's Eric Newcomer for us in New York will continue to keep us posted every step of the way. Meantime, Apple has debuted a new mid-tier iPad with a larger screen and introduced the first iPad mini update since 2015. The announcements come a week before the company rolls out a media and entertainment bundle designed to compete with Netflix. For more, I want to bring in Bloomberg Tech's Mark Gurman, who covers Apple for us in LA. So, Mark, why these surprise announcements?
Not entirely a surprise. We wrote earlier this year these were coming, but it's a little surprising that they're doing it a week in advance of their big event. One would think they would want to hold all of these devices until March 25th, but in this case they are not. Seems like they want to clear the deck, make all the attention around the Netflix competitor and the magazine service and whatever they have to discuss on the software and services side around their credit card next Monday.
So how does this fit into the broader iPad strategy? I mean, some people probably thought the iPad mini was long gone.
Yeah, this is a big change. Previously, we were basically looking at two distinct types of iPads. An entry-level iPad around $300, just called the iPad, geared towards education, but also the high-end iPad Pro models that could top, $1,700. Now we're seeing the return of the iPad mini and the return of the iPad Air sort of as mid-tier devices. These are priced at $400 and $500 at the base capacities with just Wi-Fi and no cellular, a little bit more expensive than the education-only models, a little bit more high capabilities. And these are basically refreshes to older lines that people have been asking for new models for, right? The iPad Pro is quite expensive for most people, but people wanted some of that faster performance and the better screens, and now they're getting that with the 10.5-inch iPad Air. There's a lot of people who wanted to see sort of an iPad Pro-ified version of the smaller iPad mini, and now you're getting that to some extent with the iPad mini 5 today as well.
I think there might be some parents out there who are excited about the new iPad mini, just a hunch. But is this, for Apple, a vote of confidence on the iPad? I mean, we know that sales have been falling year after year, but that Apple isn't going to be breaking out iPad sales, just like it's not breaking out iPhone or Mac sales anymore.
Right, so what you're seeing is an expansion of the product lineup. Right now, if you look at the Mac, for example, and in many ways the iPad is destined as the Mac's replacement in the minds of some, there are so many different Macs. So we're seeing Apple now expand the iPad product lineup into several new shapes and sizes and prices in a way they haven't really done before. So it's encouraging to see that expansion of the iPad. They're basically coming out and saying, hey, the iPad is one complete product family as well, just like the Mac. What they do need to do now, though, is really up their software game for the iPad, because I think it's quite behind some of the software you're seeing from some of the other tablet makers. Certainly needs more functionality to bring it more on par with a Mac or PC.
Now, tell us a little bit more about what we're expecting out of this event on Monday. It's not just an opportunity for Apple to unveil its original content strategy, but also a new Apple News subscription service. We've got comments from the CEO of the New York Times who said they're actually holding back some articles from Apple's news service. Talk to us about how that impacts Apple's bigger strategy here.
Well, I can tell you the new iPads and iMacs certainly won't be next week because they're getting those out of the way this week. But in terms of your question, this is Apple showcasing itself as a services company. These of media events, especially ones at the Steve Jobs Theater in Cupertino, have been reserved for some of their highest profile new products, whether that's new Apple Watches, new iPhones. The iPhone 10 was announced there, a few other devices over the past couple of years since it's opened in 2017. And now they're putting services up there exactly with their highest end hardware. So that's really a way to, reassure investors, employees, and consumers that services is pretty much just important as some of the other hardware products they're doing. So this is really going to showcase that.
All right, well, you will be all over that event for us. Bloomberg Tech's Mark Gurman, as always, thank you so much for stopping by. Coming up, social media platforms like Facebook rely heavily on algorithms to stop the spread of extremist content. But as we saw in New Zealand, that doesn't always work. We dig into why next. And if you like Bloomberg News, check us out on the radio. You can listen on the Bloomberg app, Bloomberg.com, and in the U.S. on SiriusXM. This is Bloomberg.
Today, as we sit here, 99% of the ISIS and Al-Qaeda content that we take down on Facebook, our AI systems flag before any human sees it. So that's a success in terms of rolling out AI tools that can proactively police and enforce safety across the community.
That right there is what Mark Zuckerberg told the Senate Judiciary Committee back in April of last year. And this is what Facebook's newsroom tweeted the day after the New Zealand mosque shootings that killed 50 people. In the first 24 hours, we removed 1.5 million videos of the attack globally, of which over 1.2 million were blocked at upload. So just how does that video keep getting uploaded after such an attack? To discuss, we've got Carter Kosoniger, professor of technology and digital business at the Wharton School. He is also the author of a new book called A Human's Guide to Machine Learning, a look at how algorithms are shaping lives today. Also with us, Bloomberg Tech's global executive editor, Tom Dial. So that means that the video still made it on Facebook's platform 300,000 times. Tom, is that even worse than we thought?
We knew it was bad. We knew it was bad not just on Facebook, but also on YouTube and other platforms in social media on the internet. We know it's bad when this many people can see such violent, gruesome imagery, and when these companies struggle to use the tools that they have at their disposal to pull it down. It's a terrible thing. That's a lot of views, and as we saw over the weekend, those things are getting politicized by other parties as well, as we saw with Erdogan.
Professor Hosanagor, we know that it took 17 long minutes for the video to be caught and taken down in the first place, but then why so many hundreds of thousands of times does it still make it through the algorithm when clearly Facebook doesn't want this on its platform?
Well, it's pretty clear Facebook does not want it on its platform. They've taken a number of steps over the years, but we have to recognize that live videos are particularly problematic and thorny for these algorithms. So most of these firms, including Facebook, they have a three-pronged approach to catch these kinds of content. First, they've created a large database of known offensive or extremist content. So anytime a video is uploaded, they compare it against that. But live videos, by definition, don't look like a video that they've seen before.
So why have live video at all? I mean, it's clearly dangerous. There have been murders and suicides on Facebook's live platform before.
Well, that's for their business, the new area of growth that they've been kind of looking at. And it has a lot of potential, a lot of opportunities where people are at a music concert, they can stream what's happening there. I could potentially be streaming to my friends, hey, I'm on Bloomberg. And so that's appealing to Facebook. But the catch is that they have a bunch of machine learning algorithms that look at this content and they predict the likelihood that the content is offensive, but it's not an exact science because you have a video of somebody shooting that could be a terror-related content, or it could be somebody at a shooting range, it could be somebody uploading a video game, so it gets to be a bit problematic, and live video in particular is very hard.
So now, Tom, Facebook and YouTube know that this is a problem. Is there any way to put the genie back in the bottle or the monster back in its cage now that this is a feature on the site? Or do you disable it, or do you delay live video?
Right, that's a question that has come up, is do you delay, like on broadcast television, for example, you don't see the terrible things that happen, you know, the wardrobe malfunctions, what have you, because there is this delay, or it's, in theory, that's the way it's supposed to be. Now, practically speaking, when you have millions of people at any given moment putting live video out there, I don't see, and maybe you could explain how you can physically actually delay live video. Does it even become live video in that instance?
Well, yeah, you call it live in quotes, but you delay it a little bit. And that helps to some extent. But in the end, you know, no algorithm will have 100% accuracy. So you do rely on human beings. So all these companies have human moderators. They also rely on users flagging offensive content. The human beings take action, but that takes a few minutes, a few hours sometimes. And so one has to, in some ways, deal with this. The real question is not why did a video get through, and I think it's unavoidable with live content. The question for me is, what exactly are these firms doing to police the content? Can they be more transparent? Are there independent audits done? And that's something we're starting to see some initial steps, but really they could take that far.
So that's a question of values. The point was made over the weekend that these platforms have actually done a lot to take down terrorist, ISIS-related content. But not nearly the same efforts have been taken to eliminate white supremacy, for example, on these platforms. You know, often you'll hear, well, this is free speech, or this doesn't quite cross the line. What about this bigger problem that white supremacy and hate online can often feed some of these violent acts?
Yeah, it's, I think, a tough line between what is free speech and what is clearly promoting hate on the platform and needs to go away. For every decision they'll be taking, there'll be somebody on the other side, but they have to take an aggressive action. They have to view themselves as media companies that have to take on the responsibility of curating. I think they cannot hide behind, we're a platform, we're just letting users share what they want, because I think users do want some policing, so we do want them to take a stand.
And this goes back to something that Mark Zuckerberg has talked about from the beginning, which is he wants us to think of Facebook as a technological company, not as a media company, because once you start to consider yourself or be considered a media company, you become subject to the same rules and regulations that other media companies in the U.S. are subject to. And that gets back to, government coming in, intervening, and imposing these limits on things like delays and, what kind of content. The other thing to bear in mind, just really quickly, is Facebook has gotten in trouble in the past when it is viewed as filtering out political content. And so sometimes right-leaning content that we may see as extreme, Facebook wants to be very careful about saying this can't be on our platform, because the right will come back and say, look, Facebook is discriminating against us in the same way the left would if we saw Facebook start to filter out far left-leaning content.
Right. We're actually going to talk about that a little bit later in the show with the State Attorney General of Texas. So Tom Giles of Bloomberg, Kartik Hosanagar, author of A Human's Guide to Machine Intelligence. Thank you so much for stopping by. All right, coming up, Activision Blizzard is taking a page from traditional sports leagues, how it is bringing a city-based model to esports next. And Bloomberg Tech Live streaming on Twitter. You can check us out at Technology, and be sure to follow our global breaking news network, TikTok, on Twitter. This is Bloomberg. OneWeb, fresh off launching its first batch of satellites, has pulled in another huge round of funding as it seeks to build a worldwide internet system delivered from space. The startup just announced that it had just raised $1.25 billion, bringing its total investment to date to $3.4 billion. SoftBank, Qualcomm, and the Rwandan government are among the investors. Well, Activision Blizzard is bringing esports to a city near you. Starting in 2020, the 20 franchises of Activision's competitive Overwatch League will begin hosting matches in their home cities. Much like NFL or NBA teams, each franchise will have a home venue, representing cities from New York to Paris to Shanghai. The company's esports division continues to model itself after traditional sports organizations, hiring several veteran sports execs to its team. Bloomberg's Scarlett Fu sat down with Activision Blizzard's esports CEO Pete Vlastelica at the Bloomberg Business Sports Summit to discuss.
We're really proud of the fact that we've been able to cross-pollinate great sports executives with gaming and esports professionals to create something completely new, which I think is unique in our category, actually. I don't see anyone else making the kinds of moves, team-building moves, sort of bringing in sports expertise into their esports businesses. We think about the ecosystem a lot, and the fact that to build a successful sports league, you need a lot of partners rowing with you in the same direction. Owners, sponsors, media rights partners, licensees, players, they're all these constituents whose success matters a lot to us. And that's the way sports works. And so when we set out to build that kind of ecosystem around our leagues, we thought, well, it'd be great to do that with a team of people who have done it before.
I like that word that you use, cross-pollinate, because you're taking the best practices from all these different parts of sports and putting it into this new league.
Yeah.
What do you have to reinvent, though? Or, maybe wrong word. What do you have to start over from scratch? What can you not import that you have to come up with on your own? Yeah.
Well, the advantages that esports leagues have with respect to traditional sports are that esports is young, global, and digital native. And so traditional sports leagues are looking for ways to become younger, more global, more digital native. We start there, and that brings challenges that traditional sports executives may not have dealt with. How do you present a game in a way that is going to capture and hold the attention of a 20-year-old fan instead of a 50-year-old fan? How do you present a broadcast simultaneously in real time in a dozen languages? And how do you create a viewing experience around the broadcast that matches the expectations that young young people have for the kind of engagement and interaction with the stream that they're used to. Those are challenges that I don't think sports executives really have at the top of their agenda, and so there is a bit of a learning curve for new execs coming in from sports.
Now, the Overwatch League is in its second season right now. It launched in mid-February. You have 20 franchises. What have you learned so far about what works and perhaps what doesn't work and therefore needs to be done over?
Well, the big bet we made with the Overwatch League is that we can unlock fans through the city-based model. It was the first city-based esport league, also the first permanent franchised esports league. So we bet that if we found the right owners in the right markets, we could give people all over the world a reason to pay attention to this league that they wouldn't have had under the old esports model, which was just, not rooted in any geography. What we've learned in a short time is that even though we're not in those home markets yet, next year, we just announced that next year will be our first year actually playing home matches in home markets. For the first 2 years, we've been playing all of our regular season in Los Angeles. Despite that, there are already large groups of fans springing up in these cities to support the team that carries the name of their city. And we see them self-organizing around viewing parties. The teams are hosting viewing parties and charging admission, and thousands of people are showing up. And so it's been a surprise, frankly, that that's happened as quickly as it has, given that we're not yet out in the market. So that's working. We still have a long way to go on the city-based plan. We need to get these teams to a place where they're hosting really fun events in their market. And there's 20 teams right now in the Overwatch League. They all are going to learn from each other.
Right.
It's going to take some time to figure out what the right model is.
You also have a city-based Call of Duty franchise league in the works as well. How's that going to be different from the Overwatch League, just briefly?
Well, the game is different. And unlike with the Overwatch League, where we were starting from scratch, it was a new game. Here, there's an existing ecosystem, an existing group of players and fans and sponsors and owners. And so we need to work within those constraints in order to build something that satisfies the core, plus creates a massive amount of upside by capturing casual fans who aren't watching today.
Bloomberg's Scarlett Fu there with Activision Blizzard Esports CEO Pete Vlastelica. Coming up, U.S. Attorney Generals are looking closely at whether Google presents an antitrust case. Our interview with the top lawyer for Texas, Attorney General Ken Paxton, is next. Plus, cloud storage company Dropbox wants to create a seamless workflow for its users. We're going to talk about how it's competing with the likes of Apple, Google, and Microsoft next. This is Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang. Last September, then U.S. Attorney General Jeff Sessions called a meeting of state attorneys general to discuss whether Google and Facebook were suppressing conservative views. Well, now we know that a smaller group of those state officials have begun looking into possible antitrust or consumer protection violations by Google. And this comes at a time when presidential hopefuls like Senator Elizabeth Warren are calling for a breakup of big tech firms. A rallying cry that has even reached across the aisle from the likes of Texas Senator Ted Cruz, who retweeted Senator Warren's criticisms of Facebook, adding, "First time I've ever retweeted Elizabeth Warren, but she's right. Big tech has way too much power to silence free speech. They shouldn't be censoring Warren or anybody else. A serious threat to our democracy." That was after Facebook took down some campaign ads for Warren discussing these very issues. To talk about this more, I want to get to Austin, where Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton is standing by. Attorney General Paxton, thank you so much for joining us. So I have to start off with, are you and Texas part of this group of attorneys general that's looking into whether Google presents an antitrust or consumer protection case?
We absolutely are. We have serious concerns about both of those issues that you've talked about, both antitrust, just the power and the wealth of these companies. We have a history in this country of looking at those issues and breaking up companies that are too big. And then we also have concerns about privacy. the lack of transparency in how they collect this information, the lack of transparency of how they use this information. Consumers are not being paid for this. And there are also vulnerable populations like children who are getting their data gathered, and we have no protections there for them.
So Google did release a statement in response to this probe, if you will, or early stages of a probe into Google, saying privacy and security are built into all of our products, and we will continue to engage constructively with state attorneys general on policy issues. What kind of action, given all of your concerns, do you think needs to be taken against Google?
Well, I think we just need to get more information from them. A lot of the questions are answered with very general answers about analytics, and so there's not a lot of clarity for state attorney generals to understand exactly what they're doing with this data, what they're doing with our data. I've heard that, Google has literally, thousands and thousands of data points on every consumer that uses them, and knows more about you than you do. So it is a little concerning that most consumers are not aware of the just massive data that these companies have, and then how they're using it and selling it, and obviously the consumer is not getting any of that money.
Now, I'm sure you're very well aware of Senator Elizabeth Warren's proposal to break up big tech at this point. Here's what she had to say at South by Southwest about a week and a half ago about her proposal.
That opportunity to do what you do best, to come up with a great idea, to work your heart out to make it happen, to be able to compete on a level playing field, is taken away by these platform giants. So my view is break those things apart, and we will have a much more competitive, robust market in America.
You've got Republicans on your side of the aisle, like Ted Cruz, agreeing with her, at least in principle. Do you think big tech needs to be broken up?
Look, I'm not sure yet, but I certainly have concerns. I've talked to a lot of their competitors who are being pushed out of the marketplace, and they have no choice in how they respond because there's such control by a company like Google that controls about 89% of the searches. And so it does put these companies, smaller companies, these startups either get purchased or they get pushed out of the marketplace. And so there are concerns about competitiveness and companies be able to start up and compete.
Now, Republicans generally resist the government getting too involved in the private marketplace. What makes this time different, or this situation different?
So, we're definitely tend to be free market. We want lots of competition. That's the key word, competition. But when you have companies that dominate the marketplace becoming almost monopolistic, well, then competition goes away, and then you have this argument that consumers may be harmed. And obviously, the European Union has already fined Google, billions of dollars in 2 different cases. And so there are concerns about just the competitiveness and the opportunity to go create products that Google doesn't push out of the marketplace.
How do you feel, given your concerns about data? How do you feel about Facebook specifically? And would you be interested in taking on, a similar exploration of whether Facebook deserves some of this scrutiny as well?
Certainly, we are looking at the companies like Facebook and Google. It's not just limited to those 2 companies. It's any of these giant companies that are dominating the marketplace and potentially harming consumers and causing consumers to be in a position where all of this data is controlled by 1 company or 2 companies or 3 companies, and the consumer doesn't have access to it, they don't get paid for it, and they don't know how it's being used.
Do you think consumers should get paid for their data?
Hey, look, I think that should be looked at. I mean, this is incredibly valuable information when you know so much about every consumer, and you're selling that data, and the consumer doesn't even know. There ought to at least be some greater transparency involved so the consumer realizes what they're turning over to these companies.
So if you're looking at Google and Facebook, and as you say, other big tech companies, is it fair to say you're also looking at Amazon and Apple and Microsoft?
Look, we're just beginning this. We don't necessarily have specific companies that we've targeted, but we are looking at a broad range of companies that control a lot of the marketplace and trying to determine, are they involved in viewpoint discrimination? Are they protecting consumer data? How do we get more transparency in the process so consumers are treated fairly and their information is protected? Because we don't know how much these companies are protecting consumer data and who they're selling it to.
Now, last year, we reported that this exploration of Google came out of this meeting with then Attorney General Jeff Sessions out of a concern that these tech companies were suppressing conservative views. Were you at that meeting with then Attorney General Sessions?
No, I couldn't attend. I had other people in my office at that meeting. We are concerned about this. I mean, we had this just happen this week in our Texas Senate. The Texas Senate caucus put up a Facebook post about a born alive bill to protect children that are born alive from being aborted after they're alive. And that content was taken down by Facebook. They were arguing that was engagement bait. And then they also took down another Facebook post by an individual senator that talked about that issue. I don't know what engagement bait is. I thought engagement is what they wanted. I thought free speech was what they wanted, but that is certainly an issue that is coming up more and more often.
So do you believe this is deliberate or inadvertent by Facebook?
It's hard to know because it seems relatively planned. I mean, they don't seem to have great answers for why this post versus another post and why that's engagement bait and hundreds like it or not engagement bait. They always claim they've got some analytics or they've got some algorithm, but we can never seem to get an information on what that algorithm's actually doing.
Now, meantime, there's a lot of concern about the video of the mass shooting that was uploaded onto Facebook and then shared on Facebook hundreds of thousands of times. Facebook was unable to stop it 300,000 times from being posted on the platform. What sort of role do you think the states should have in these issues?
Look, we're talking First Amendment here. Free speech is dangerous. It allows people to talk about all kinds of things that we may not like personally. But I think free speech ought to be very, very broad and very, very protected. It was something the founders, listed first. Obviously, religious expression being something else that was protected. So I think we got to be very careful at obviously government limiting speech. But if businesses are going to limit speech, they need to be transparent about what they're doing, and they need not to falsely advertise that somehow this is free speech when they are controlling content.
All right, lots of issues to discuss. Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton, thank you so much for joining us. We'll follow your actions and see what happens. Meantime, President Trump took to Twitter over the weekend to criticize Google specifically, saying Google is helping China and their military, but not the U.S. Terrible. The good news is that they helped crooked Hillary Clinton and not Trump. How did that turn out? In a statement to NBC News, a spokesperson for the tech giant said that we are not working with the Chinese military. We are working with the U.S. government, including the Department of Defense, in many areas, including cybersecurity, recruiting, and healthcare. Coming up, Dropbox adding new tools and integrations to improve workflow for millions of users. How the cloud storage company is competing with the likes of Apple, Google, and Microsoft. Next, this is Bloomberg. Time now for our Work Shifted series, where we take a look at how businesses are leveraging tech to improve the workplace. And one company expanding its digital workspace is Dropbox. While best known for its cloud storage business, Dropbox is building on its third-party integrations to offer tools like electronic signature and video annotations. This as it grows partnerships with big tech companies like Google, Salesforce, and Autodesk, which also happen to be its biggest competitors. Joining us to discuss Dropbox, Vice President of Product, Adam Nash. You're, of course, Adam, a veteran of the tech industry. How do you work with and compete with the likes of these gigantic companies on a daily basis?
Thanks for having me. I think that in technology, the best solutions always follow the customer. And it turns out that work is changing for most people. We use more and more applications, more and more devices. Our teams vary. And so it turns out a lot of people touch all these services. So even when technologies compete on some fronts, if you're focused on the customer, you have to focus on making everything work together. And this has been one of the strong areas for Dropbox for quite some time, is that everything comes together with content.
So, you're talking about how the work landscape is shifting, and Dropbox is part of that shift. What are some trends we're going to see in workplace productivity and collaboration this year?
Well, I think there's two trends that have been rolling through the workplace for some time, but this year they're going to become critically important for most organizations. The first is that most people realize now that work is getting done in teams, and those teams are becoming more and more varied. Who you work with on one project is different than another. It doesn't cut cleanly across the organizational lines, the hierarchy. In some cases, you're working with people outside the company. And so having tools and services that naturally connect across all those different boundaries is really important.
So tell us about the tools that you're offering. I mean, you just bought a company called HelloSign, digital signing contract company.
Yeah, that's a great example. I think that the space, digital signature, e-signature is one of those areas, workflows, which starts with content, right? You have documents that are created constantly. Dropbox happens to be a platform that a huge number of people have trusted with an incredible amount of content. And so making that workflow work between the creators, people running the process, people who are signing, many of which are outside the company, right? Not in your org chart, not in your IT system, is one of the places where Dropbox thinks it can add a lot of value.
So obviously, cybersecurity has been a big issue. We've seen these massive hack attacks over and over again. What are you doing to make sure that that doesn't happen to Dropbox, given the incredible amount of personal information that you have on your users?
Yeah, well, as you can imagine, it's something that's incredibly important to the company. I mean, Dropbox scale really is surprising to most people, right? Over 500 million users, 2 exabytes of content. Dropbox is built on the trust that our users, both individuals and in the workplace, put into Dropbox to protect their information. And so as you can imagine, we pride ourselves on kind of the world-class infrastructure, security systems, technology, and we're always pushing the front edge of that. Many times collaborating with our peers around identifying threats and making sure that we deal with them as quickly as possible.
There's been a ton of consolidation in enterprise software. Do you imagine that Dropbox will, including giant acquisitions, I mean, do you imagine that Dropbox will continue to be an independent company?
You know, I'm relatively new to the company, but I have to tell you, there's a lot of excitement within the walls at Dropbox about the potential for this platform. If you look again at what's going on right now, you know, content really is becoming king. More and more deliverables are the content that people produce, share, and collaborate around. And as more and more collaboration happens online, we're seeing Dropbox as more and more of a platform where all these different partners, some of which you mentioned, all come together. So whether you're using Microsoft Office, whether you're using G Suite, whether you're using the latest startup, all of that comes together around the content in Dropbox. And we think we have a role to play in creating a more enlightened way to work with less distraction, less noise, and more focus on the work. So we see that as a really high potential path. And so we still see it as very early days in terms of what Dropbox is building.
All right, Dropbox head of product, Adam Nash, good to have you back here.
Thank you.
On the show in your new role. All right, Warner Brothers CEO Kevin Tsujihara is the latest Hollywood mogul to be toppled by scandal. Tsujihara is leaving the studio over allegations he had a sexual relationship with an actress he helped promote. AT&T's Warner Media said Tsujihara brought risk to the company. John Stankey, head of Warner Media, released this statement. Kevin acknowledges that his mistakes are inconsistent with the company's leadership expectations and could impact the company's ability to execute going forward. All right, still ahead this week in San Francisco, members of the video gaming industry gathering for the annual Game Developers Conference. What is trending this year? We'll tell you next. This is Bloomberg. Such an interesting new world.
The world is changing.
For us, it's not about being first, it's about being the best.
A lot will change over the next 5 years.
I've always bet on technology.
I see the stock price flying sky high.
We invest in the ride-sharing company to understand what does autonomous driving mean to our product delivery strategy in the future. And also, we would like to know where the sharing economy will go.
A new study has found that most of Amazon's private label products are duds, not disruptors. The study from e-commerce research firm Marketplace Pulse looked at 23,000 products and found that shoppers aren't more inclined to buy Amazon brands, even when the company elevates them in search results. Well, this week, more than 25,000 members of the video game industry will gather at the annual Game Developers Conference. Google is set to unveil a video game service codenamed Project Stream that will reportedly allow people to play Fortnite and other modern titles in a web browser or on a television using inexpensive hardware. If it's successful, the system might herald the biggest shift in the $180 billion a year global gaming market since Super Mario jumped from arcades to the living room. Joining us to discuss this year's conference, John Riccitiello, CEO of Unity Technology and former Electronic Arts CEO. It's good to have you back here on the show, John.
Great to be here.
You're obviously a veteran in this business, and you've been around the block a few times. You are giving the keynote at GDC this year. What trends do you think we'll see emerge this year in gaming?
I think people are going to be talking a lot about streaming and how that can change the living room for people. Sort of the Netflix of video games is in the offing from a number of big companies. I think they're going to be talking about ray tracing, which is sort of a new technology for rendering something so it can look absolutely real. We're going to show a demo tonight where we will challenge the audience to tell them the difference between there was no car there, we just drew it and displayed it with our newest and latest real-time technology versus live video. And so it's virtually indistinguishable now. I think digital humans is going to be sort of interesting. Again, we're going to show a demo tonight where we're going to show a human interacting in a very complex science fiction environment. And he looks absolutely human. And again, this guy doesn't live, he's never been anywhere. And the possibility of sort of recasting your favorite actor from days of yore, a 25-year-old John Wayne, we could bring him back this year and put him in the movie you might want to watch. So that's actually pushing the boundaries. And then there's been a ton of stuff being talked about, open platform, closed platform. Unity is sort of the forefront of the open platform thesis. And I think that'll play itself out.
So what do you think of Google's new Netflix of gaming strategy, given that they're not making any of the content themselves?
Well, one is I'm under NDA. And secondly, they have an event tomorrow. And so with all due respect to the many lawyers that back me up, I'm going to stick with that for now. But look, I think that streaming is definitely a part of the future. I don't think hardware under your TV is going away anytime soon because I think there's some advantages to that. But I also think that Google's an amazing technology company. I know they put their heart and soul into what they're announcing tomorrow, and I expect big things.
Now, the gaming industry is grappling with some, big issues: violence, lack of diversity on and off-screen addiction. Unity is in a unique position because your platform powers 50% of all new mobile games. What are some things that you can do to help the gaming industry deal with these issues, when it comes to the actual development?
Well, look, I think we could unpack that question over the next 2 hours.
Right.
But
it's a big question.
It's a very big question. I'd start by saying Unity powers about half the world's games across all platforms. It's a pretty amazing place to be and a great vantage point. And I'd start by saying one of the things that's plagued the industry for a long time has been a lack of diversity, a lack of inclusion. You wrote a book on the subject. And motivated me, and we're doing more at Unity to support diversity and inclusion than most any place I'm aware of. And I tell you, one of the things to ensure you get the right outcomes is to have the right input. And if we have a diverse and inclusive environment, I think the work our company does will be better, and we can have a really big influence over the rest of the industry. So one is, you can do the right thing by trying to be the right team, and I think we can influence the industry. In terms of, violence in video games and that type of thing, look, I, like many parents, did my level best to make sure my kids saw the right kind of content, whether it was music, movies, or games, when they were ready for it emotionally. I also chaired the ESA, the Entertainment Software Association, for a very long time, and I've read all the studies. I don't think there's any more of a correlation between violence in video games and actual violence than there is in the fact that if you watch Hamlet, there's a half a dozen dead bodies on stage, and I don't think I ever left the theater, and whacked anybody over the head. So I don't think that there's a...
you couldn't shoot those actors, though. You didn't shoot those actors yourself, though.
No, but I'm just saying that I don't think there's... The connection there has been researched many, many times, and I don't think it's there.
So AR and VR, when will they finally go mainstream, and will they? VR especially.
I think they both will be mainstream. I think they'll be both be mainstream probably within about 24 months, 36 months. Look, some great companies, Facebook and Oculus, HoloLens with AR and Microsoft, Vive, and other really, really cool Magic Leap. We support them all. And what they brought out so far is expensive, and there's not a lot of content for it, and they're in their early stages, not really ready for mainstream. It takes a while to get these things set up and to use them properly. So that changes in the next 24 months
or so. Okay, so last quick question, Fortnite. Will it be another flash in the pan or a lasting gaming phenomenon?
There is always the next lasting gaming phenomenon to be replaced by the next lasting gaming phenomenon. But gaming, here's a thought for you. The top 25 intellectual properties in the world, top 25 in a row, are all games with revenues over $1 billion a year. This is a real industry now. And whether it's Fortnite or whatever, they're all going to be there.
All right. John Riccitiello, CEO of Unity Technologies, thank you so much.
Thank you
for stopping by. Good to have you. And that does it for this edition of the show. We are, as always, live streaming on Twitter. You can check us out there at Technology and follow our Global Breaking News Network TikTok on Twitter. This is Bloomberg.